At 3 a.m. ship time on Holomath Relay, the universe changed because a junior systems tech could not sleep. Technician Samir Darzi sat alone in the data analysis bay, staring at a cascade of alien script flowing across his console. The screens around him hummed in a soft halo of status lights, third shift quiet settling over the station like a blanket. He rolled his shoulders, joints popping. The cursor blinked patiently beside a half-finished diagnostic script. He knew he should finish the script. He also knew the strange encrypted burst that had just arrived from a Xyrath relay buoy out on the fringe was far more interesting. Samir checked the station log. The burst was tagged as non-priority, deferred decryption. The queue would handle it in a few hours, after a dozen higher-ranked tasks. No one would yell at him if he bumped it up. Strictly speaking, this was a misuse of the system. Strictly speaking, he did not care. He rerouted the burst into his workspace. The encryption layer was old, familiar. He had seen the same spectral key signature on dozens of intercepted Xyrath messages. Supply lists, minor tactical updates, propaganda screeds. All ugly in their own way, all predictable. This one was different. It was big, dense, layered in a way that felt less like a message and more like a vault. His eyes sharpened. "Of course you're special," he muttered. "You woke me up." Lines of code danced under his hands. He built a key lattice, let the station's quantum sidecars chew on the harder edges, then slipped his own routines into the cracks like thin knives. Minutes ticked by. The world outside the viewport rolled on, a distant star field, and the faint smear of a gas giant's rings. At 3:28 a.m., the first part of the vault opened. Columns and rows, symbols that mapped easily to numeric blocks, coordinates, dates, casualty estimates. Each line precise, unemotional. Samir's chest grew cold before his mind fully understood. He paged down, more entries, and more. His fingers started to shake. He hit the comm key. "Holomath analysis to duty officer," he said, voice suddenly dry. "I need the on-call cryptographer and xenostrategic duty. Priority 1. He hesitated, then added, "And wake Cadet Nidlovu. She needs to see this." In her tiny quarters on the same deck, Cadet Amita Nidlovu jolted awake to the station-wide priority chime. She rolled out of her bunk, hair tousled, mind already shifting from dream to work. She had a habit of keeping her boots neatly by the door. Now she slammed them on without bothering with neatness. She did not know, as she ran for the bay, that this would be the night she spent the rest of her life telling people about. By 4 a.m., the analysis bay was crowded. Amita stood at the main console beside Samir, heart pounding. Lines of alien script flowed past on the main holo, annotated by human translations. Each row began with coordinates of a star, then a timestamp, then a brief description in terse Xyrath code. The descriptions translated to clinical phrases: core collapse induction complete, radiation cone alignment optimal, projected extinction efficiency, 99.993%. Under notes, every so often, a different mark appeared, a Xyrath glyph that the translation engines could not parse, but which someone, Xyrath, long ago had tagged with a secondary meaning. Confirmed. Amita read line after line, sick horror building beneath her ribs. Samir's voice was hoarse. "We're calling it the Oblivion Calendar. Every line is a scheduled stellar detonation." An older officer standing behind them, a major in Sol Science Fleet intelligence, folded his arms tightly. He tried to maintain his usual detachment. Training urged him to treat this as data, not tragedy. It was impossible. "Are these theoretical models?" he asked. "Plans? Look at the timestamps," Amita whispered, fingers dancing over the filters. "Sir, these earlier entries, they match historic anomalies. Recorded supernovae in Allied archives. The Thalkar lost a colony like this a century ago near a blue giant. Date matches within an hour." She flipped to the next block. "And here," the Vishari spoke once, about a silent burning that took their outer nests. "This row's coordinates line up. This is not theory." The major stared at the screen. "They have been doing this for centuries." Amita nodded, throat tight. "On purpose. With a schedule." The major forced his gaze down the list. Next upcoming entries? Samir swallowed. Plenty of distant systems. But this one flagged in red. Here. The coordinates popped up. Samir overlaid them onto a galactic map. A single point pulsed near the border of Solace compact space and a scarred region of contested territory. Amita recognized the star immediately. She had written a paper on its peculiar spectrum as part of her academy coursework. That's Seraphay's primary, she said. The Orosok Remnant's home star. Samir tapped the attached timestamp. It converted into compact standard and flashed onto the map overlay. His mouth went dry. In projected baseline, their star goes unstable in about 5 million years, Amita said mechanically. Natural evolution. Main sequence to red giant. Samir whispered the value displayed. Xyrath's scheduled collapse is in less than 5 years. The bay fell silent. In that silence, Amita's mind flashed to the Orosok she had glimpsed on news feeds. Lanky, stone-skinned bipeds with luminous eyes. Survivors of wars, treaties, betrayals. A people clinging to a single scarred world, rebuilding under containment terms no one liked but everyone accepted. Remote, abstract, not abstract anymore. Her hands curled into fists. She thought, they cannot do this. No one has the right. Behind her, the Major straightened. Upload everything to Sol Central, he ordered. Mark it absolute priority. The Secretary General and Fleet Command need this an hour ago. Samir nodded and set the transfer. Amita watched the progress bar climb, knowing that with each percent, the shape of interstellar politics twisted. In that shared moment of grim realization, none of them yet imagined that the response would not be to plead or to bargain, but to commit an act that until that night had lived only in legend. They would move a star. In a hidden facility far beyond Halimath's reach, in a region of twisted space that maps marked only as a warning zone, Strategos Varuuk watched a sun bleed. The Xyrath Dominion honored beauty and destruction, not in the gaudy spectacle of simple violence, but in the symmetrical, the calculated, the efficient. Varuuk was a connoisseur. On the viewing wall before him, a distant yellow-white star swelled, tremored, and ejected a flare along a carefully chosen axis. Its interior had been coaxed, over decades, into a precarious instability. The final push had come from the Continuum Lance node that his team had activated less than an hour before. Now, the star listed toward catastrophe. The readings were exquisite. Core collapse cascade achieved, reported a Lance technician. Voice filtered through the hissing modulation of a Xyrath breath. Varuuk's black eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. The star's profile updated in real time, projected into his command chamber in shimmering detail. Layers of plasma, gradients of temperature, the jitter of a magnetic field twisting under strain. Beauty, all of it. This star warmed no inhabited worlds. It was a test subject. Nothing but hydrogen and helium. Isolated. A pet. Time to detonation? Varuuk asked. Model predicts range between 6 days and 8 days, the technician replied. Margin of error within acceptable parameters. Subsequent events will test deeper stability. Varuuk nodded once. He was not interested in this one's death. He had watched many such trials. The purpose was refinement, to understand precisely how long a star could be held on the brink, how cleanly one could shape its eventual outburst. Precision allowed power without waste. Power without waste allowed a timetable. He turned away from the holo and regarded the central console, his console. Here, layered in security far beyond mere encryption, lay the Oblivion calendar. He had conceived it, refined it, expanded it over years. Under its digital skin, entire civilizations lay pinned like insects, their fates reduced to coordinates and dates. In the Dominion's doctrine, fear was the greatest shield. Armies could be defeated, fleets could be outmaneuvered, but tell an enemy that their sun will kill them on a fixed day, and many would give up before the war truly began. Panic would soften defenses long before any battle. Varuuk traced a claw along a line of glyphs representing Seraphay's star. The Orosok had defied the Dominion once, in a savage ground conflict that had cost the Xyrath prestige. The terms that followed contained them, but left Varuuk dissatisfied. The Orosok were resilient, Dangerous. Their world sat like a splinter near one of the Dominion's expansion corridors. The calendar offered a clean solution. Let them rebuild, hope, recover scraps of dignity. Then, at the appointed moment, erase their sky. He had chosen that date himself. Strategos, said an aide. Long-range listening posts registered a spike on an Allied relay. A Sol compact station has intercepted one of our secured calendar bursts. Decryption likelihood within a standard cycle is estimated at 38.9%. Varuk did not startle. The possibility had been accounted for. Data, intercepted, did not equate to power. Wielded. Let them see, he said. Let them understand that stars themselves answer to us. It will encourage compliance. Internal doubt flickered through one of his junior officers. Varuk sensed it, as surely as if the thought had been spoken. A concern about overplaying their hand, about provoking panic so great it became resistance. Varuk dismissed the thought without turning. Fear did not always lead to surrender. This was true. But resignation often followed inevitability. And what was more inevitable than the death of a son? He looked once more at his calendar, at the line labeled with Seraphe's coordinates and their scheduled end. His mandibles curled in what passed, among the Zyrath, for satisfaction. They had engineered fate itself into a sequence of dates. No one could change the path of a dying star. They met in a chamber carved from old stone, on a world that had once been poor and forgotten and now served as the heart of a growing union. Solus Prime sky was a dull amber, veiled by a thin but pervasive haze. The chamber looked out over a city grown in layers, scaffolds, and sky rails, and clustered towers. Old rock blended with new alloy. A symbol, some said, of humanity's habit of building on ruins. Secretary General Soraya Ruiz sat at the head of the curved table, a simple projection map hovering above its center. Around her, the representatives of a half-dozen powers watched, argued, and calculated. At 9 a.m. local time, the feed from Polymath Relay finished its transfer. The Oblivion calendar unfolded in the air. Jun Soryun, Solus Compact Envoy, felt his pulse tick faster as line after line flared into focus. His posture remained composed, but his fingers, clasped in front of him, tightened slightly. He knew the others saw it. Across the table, Thalkar Envoy Seaton's translucent eye stalks narrowed. The Thalkar preferred rules, frameworks, predictability. The calendar was predictability turned to horror. Beside C10, the Lume representative, Seer Elunai, held her palms hovering over the display as if feeling heat that no one else could sense. Fine filaments across her skin flickered slowly, registering shifts in electromagnetic patterns the others ignored. The coordinates match, June said quietly. Historic events, known supernovae, unexplained annihilations. This is not an idle threat. Nor is it omnipotence, C10 replied, mandibles clicking. The continuum lance is powerful, but it obeys physics. There must be constraints. Lumai Seer Lunai spoke softly, voice carrying an echo. Constraint does not comfort those who lie beneath a marked star. On the opposite arc, Vishari Queen Mind is Hydra's pod pulsed with internal light, its surface alive with the flowing patterns that conveyed thought. When the Vishari spoke, multiple harmonics laced the air. Our swarm has calculated evacuation scenarios, Ishidra said. The translation overlay smoothing the chords into words. With maximum cooperation, we could relocate possibly 13.2% of the Orosok remnant before the scheduled collapse. 13.2, June repeated. And the rest? Silence. Soraya Ruiz broke it. Her hair was pulled back, her expression stone. She had read the file at 3:49 a.m. and had not slept since. Evacuation alone is politically impossible, she said. The Orosok will not agree to abandon their world en masse. The Zyrath would treat such movement as breach of their containment. War would be immediate. Zalanth Combine's envoy, a lean trader with shifting skin, raised both hands. War is already here, if this is believed. The Dominion has been committing covert annihilations for centuries. Our roots dodged dead sectors. We thought it misfortune. It was design. In the second row of seats, Captain Ilya Voronin listened, jaw tight. He had flown through some of those quiet sectors, guiding his ship around ghost systems whose suns once shone for living worlds. He had never thought to ask this particular question. What if someone did that on purpose? He raised a hand slightly. Soraya saw him, weighed options. She knew his reputation. Fearless, stubborn, more comfortable on a hull than in a council seat. She also knew he was here because the Soul Science fleet needed a voice who understood the implications down in the engine rooms, not only on paper. "Captain Voronin," she said, "you have the floor." Ilya leaned forward. His eyes, usually warm, glinted like steel. "We are treating this as if it is just another weapon," he said. "As if we can bargain over its use. Request exceptions. That is not what this is." He gestured at the map, where a dozen stars pulsed red. "This is a doctrine. The Xyrath have bet their strategy on the assumption that all of us will accept the death of suns as something we cannot fight. At best, we argue for who dies and who gets to run." Thalkar Envoy Seaton's carapace twitched. "When a star dies, it is a stellar process, not a political one. We did not choose physics." "Maybe not," Ilya said, "but we can choose our response to someone abusing it." His thoughts flashed back to Academy days. Long nights staring at equations describing star formation and death, the immense timescales. He had loved the idea that some things were so large, so slow, so beyond any individual's reach, that they formed a stable backdrop for everything else. Now that backdrop itself was a weapon. Dr. Myra Lahari, seated beside him, watched the others with sharp, restless eyes. Her hair was uncombed from an overnight sprint through data and old archives. She had not been able to turn off the part of her mind that saw not only horror, but also mechanisms. "We are not entirely helpless before a star," Myra said. "Not anymore." Skeptical looks met her. Queen Mind Isidra's pod dimmed. "Your people have harnessed stellar power for energy. We respect that. But the Continuum Lance manipulates core dynamics. That is beyond your current capability." "For now," Myra agreed. "But listen." She called up her own projection. A holographic star appeared beside the calendar, shimmering layers of color representing density gradients and magnetic field lines. "Humanity has already built partial Dyson structures," she said. "You've seen the Solaris crown in the Coralis system. We've created artificial magnetospheres, induced flares to power collectors, dampened them to protect habitats. We've manipulated accretion disks around black holes, redirected interstellar clouds. None of that is on the same scale as triggering a core collapse, but it builds a foundation." "Foundation for what?" Seaton asked, though a hint of interest crept into his tone. Myra smiled, a brief, fierce expression. "For helping a star misbehave in a different way than the Xyrath intend." Ilunai's filaments brightened. "You speak of healing what they have wounded." "I speak of changing course," Myra said. "We can't stop Seraphi's star from collapsing, not with the time and resources we have. The process is already seeded. The Continuum Lance has been working on it for years, but collapse is not binary. The geometry of the explosion, the way its energy is distributed, the path of its ejecta, those can be altered." "You propose to aim a supernova?" Xylanth's envoy said slowly. Myra shook her head. "Not aim, nudge. Divert a fraction of a degree. Change timing. Nudge the star slightly out of perfect alignment, enough that when it goes, Seraphe does not sit directly in the main cone of death." Isidra's light flickered skeptically. "The energies are beyond comprehension." "Only if we think like we always have," Myra said. "But stars are not magical. They obey equations. We already manipulate gravity on smaller scales. If we design a field structure around the star, a kind of temporary exoskeleton, we can exert tiny but sustained shear forces on its outer layers. Over time, we can alter its angular momentum distribution. That reshapes the collapse." The Thalkar envoy's mind churned. The legal implications of this made his mandibles ache. "Even if what you suggest is possible, you would be rewriting the physical fate of a star," Seaton said. "Who grants you that authority?" And what precedent does that set? Ilya's gaze hardened. Who granted the Xyrath authority to schedule extinctions? They claimed it with a weapon. We are not claiming anything. We are trying to prevent a genocide that has been hidden in their ledger for decades. Seer Ilunai tilted her head, feeling deeper than the words. In her mind's eye, the sky of her homeworld shimmered with patterns only she and her kind could sense. She had felt wrongness for years, a subtle rhythm offbeat. Now she understood why. Your people have a saying, Ilunai murmured, reaching into human cultural memory. You do not light a fire you refuse to tend. The Dominion lit many fires. June cleared his throat. We have one more piece of data, he said, courtesy of Karun Archives. Dr. Al-Kindi? Zara Al-Kindi stood from the side row, Lila Benabid rising with her. Zara's expression was half grieving, half hungry for knowledge, for context. She had spent much of the night cross-referencing the calendar coordinates with ancient records. Our Karun colleagues have long suspected there was a pattern to certain anomalies near the Nadir Rift, Zara said. Shifts in starlight that could not be explained by natural drift. They dismissed it as noise. But with this calendar as a key, we re-examined the data. Layla flicked her wrist. A new map appeared, centered not on SCI-FI, but on a folded, dangerous region of space, labeled in angry red script, Nadir Rift. Within this region, Layla said, records from multiple species, over tens of thousands of years, mention a structure they call the Revanthi Spire. In myth, it is a place where suns are taught to move. Most assumed that was metaphor, but there are measurable anomalies. Stars near the rift, whose motion suggests past artificial manipulation. Someone did this before, Mayra whispered, almost to herself. Awe and dread tangled in her chest. Not like the Xyrath, Zara said. From what we can piece together, the builders used their technology to prevent disasters, to stabilize unstable systems, to terraform via stellar management. Then something happened. The records become quiet. We believe they dismantled much of their network. The spire may be a control node they abandoned or sealed away. Ilya saw it like a map in his head. Halamath, SCI-FI, Corrales, Nadir, Rift, points in a geometry of doom and hope. If the Revanthi Spire still exists, and if we can reach it and understand it, we might scale Mayra's idea up enough to counter the Xyrath interference, he said. We would not be starting from scratch. Soraya Ruiz exhaled slowly. Her mind raced through logistics, diplomacy, risk assessments. She was not a physicist, but she had learned, over a career of crisis management, to recognize when an impossible plan was the only one that matched the moral weight of the situation. We are not merely choosing whether to save the Orosok, she said. We are choosing whether to accept living in a galaxy where someone can quietly put your star on a calendar and walk away. Silence held again. Then, Queen Mind Ashidra pulsed with reluctant resolve. The Vashari swarm will allocate industrial capacity to construct whatever field structures you need, Ishidra said. We will do so under protest, and with conditions, but we will not stand aside. Thalkar Envoy Seaton's mandibles clicked in a pattern of formal concession. The Concord will not forbid this effort. We request to be present, to document, and to help shape the legal frameworks that must follow. Seer Ilunai smiled faintly. The Lume will send one who hears the whispers of plasma. Your machines will benefit from a voice attuned to the star's song. Across the table, a representative of the Ashviri Directorate, eyes narrowed in calculation, spoke. We will observe and report home. Nothing more, for now. Soraya turned to Ilya and Mayra. You have your authorization, she said. Project Helioshift is yours. Captain Voronin, you will command operations. Dr. Lahari, you will direct science. You will proceed to the Nadir Rift, locate the Revanthi Spire, and find a way to move a dying star's aim off its last living world. Her gaze hardened. You should assume the Xyrath will resist. June thought of evacuation numbers, of projected death counts, balanced against the lives that would be put in harm's way by such a mission. He thought of his own family, safe on a quiet orbital habitat, utterly dependent on the stability of their sun. He realized, with surreal clarity, that stability itself had become the most fragile illusion of all. The ESS Far Horizon slid out of Solus Prime's shipyards with a trail of ion glow and rumors. Within days, 1,000 news feeds across the compact played simulations of heroic crews wrapping a net of light around Seraphi's star, of Xyrath fleets reduced to scrap. Others played simulations of the star tearing itself apart early, annihilating the system and anything nearby. In truth, no one knew. On the bridge, Captain Ilya Voronin stood in the center seat, gloved hands resting lightly on the arms. The bridge dome was half transparent, stars wheeling slowly as the ship rotated to align with the jump vector. Around him, officers checked their consoles, efficient, focused. "Navigator Morita?" Ilya said. Keiko Morita's eyes flicked across 3 different projection layers. "Course to Nadir Rift plotted," she said. "Transition points cleared with Thalkar and Vishari corridors. Estimated arrival in 11 days, 6 hours, 23 minutes. Any angry messages from neighbors?" Ilya asked. June stood at a side console. As envoy, he traveled with the mission, tasked with making sure that each bold decision in space did not completely unravel political agreements on the ground. "Angry, anxious, curious," June said. "The Thalkar sent a 3-volume packet of concerns. The Vishari sent a cost analysis. The Korathi sent a congratulatory note on our audacious initiative and an implicit offer to buy whatever we learn." "Good," Ilya said dryly. "Nobody's indifferent. I hate indifference." Beside him, Dr. Mayera Lahari watched the nav screens, mind buzzing with equations. She imagined the far horizon slicing through warped space, imagined the Revanthi spire somewhere ahead, a tangle of dead or dormant machinery waiting to be coaxed awake. She felt a tremor of fear, not of the Xyrath, not even of the star's fury, but of their own capacity. If they succeeded, humanity would know it could reach into the hearts of stars and adjust their fates. "We'll need the Allied flotilla to rendezvous before we enter the rift," Mayera said. "The ESS Calderon, Vishari factory barges, Lume escorts. They're on their way," Ilya replied. "We'll have a small armada by the time we hit the boundary." He did not mention his private concerns, that the armada might prove more hindrance than help. As different species argued over risk thresholds, he didn't need to. June already knew. The envoy's mind ran along similar tracks. June watched Ilya, noting the way the captain carried weariness under his shoulders. Ilya had seen war, not the clean lines of strategy sims, but corridors filled with smoke, hulls screaming as metal tore. He hated the idea that this mission might end in more of the same. But if someone had to take a ship into the rift, Ilya preferred it be him. "Helm," Ilya said. "Take us out!" Engines flared, containment fields blossomed, and the far horizon slipped into the higher dimensional corridor that bent space between stars. Seraphi's sky glowed faintly green, a symptom of the unique interplay between its star's magnetic field and the planet's scarred upper atmosphere. On the planet's largest plateau city, an Orosok elder named Halrun stood atop a black stone balcony and watched the aurora dance. His skin shimmered, light shifting across mineral facets, scar lines white against basalt gray. His people had always read omens in the lights. He had no idea that far above, his son had been marked for death on someone else's ledger. Deep underground, in hardened bunkers, Orosok analysts sifted rumors. They had heard whispers of the Dominion's new weapon, of stars that died like snuffed candles. They had not yet seen the Oblivion calendar. They did not know their star's place upon it. They would learn soon. By the time the far horizon reached the Nadir Rift, the Allied flotilla had assembled into a ragged arrowhead. Human science vessels, Vishari fabrication hulks, a Thalkar arbitration cruiser, 2 sleek Lume corvettes, a Zelenth trade hauler repurposed for logistics. Ahead lay a dark scar against the backdrop of the galaxy, a volume of space where gravitational fields twisted like tangled vines. On Far Horizon's bridge, warning sigils pulsed amber. "Nadir Rift boundary," Keiko announced. "Gravity gradients rising. Sensors encountering scatter." Ilya watched the projected map fold in on itself. Standard routes avoided this place. Old stories warned of ships vanishing, of compasses that spun in place. "Seer Ilunai?" he asked. Ilunai stood near the forward arch, eyes half closed, hands spread. Fine filaments along her arms lifted, attuned to the subtle waves in the rift that human sensors interpreted as noise. "There are paths," she said, "threads where the tide is weaker. The Ravanthi spire sings faintly. Old, sleeping." Keiko suppressed a reflexive skepticism. She had been raised on mathematics and instrument readouts, not on intuition. But she had already watched Ilunai call out microfluctuations before her consoles registered them. "Feed me your impressions as vectors," Keiko said. "I'll translate." Together, human math and Lume sensing guided the flotilla in. As distance shrank, new shapes emerged from shadow. At first, it looked like a broken ring. Then, as active scans penetrated the haze, details sharpened. Towers of dark material curving around a captured microstar. Webbing of struts and conduits linking them. Petals of unknown alloy unfolding and folding along rhythms long since divorced from intention. Ravanthi Spire. Even seen only as data and hollow projection, it was dizzying. In the far horizon's observation lounge, crew members gathered at the wide port to stare. Samir and Amita stood together, awe momentarily eclipsing the memory of the calendar that had started all this. "That's not just a station," Amita said softly. "It's an instrument." "Biggest one I've ever seen," Samir replied, "and probably older than anything else we've ever touched." Archivist Layla Benabid watched from a corner, pulse quickening. She had read myths of this place in Karun archives since childhood. To see it made real felt like stepping into a line of legend. Zara Al-Kindi joined her. "Every time we think we're the first to do something," Zara murmured, "we find someone else's fingerprints." "Maybe this time we'll read them right," Lila said. Boarding the spire was not easy. Drones went first. The first 3 vanished as soon as they crossed an invisible threshold. The 4th returned only static. The 5th survived long enough to send partial visuals. Immense corridors lined with flowing glass-like conduits. Vaults filled with dormant machinery. Something about the spire's interior interfered with basic circuitry in ways no one fully understood. The Karun archives had hinted at it. The builders disliked unthinking machines acting without guidance. Ilya made the call quickly. "We send crewed shuttles," he said to the mission council. "With insulated systems, manual overrides, and people ready to improvise." Seaton bristled. "That is unnecessary risk. Drones could be hardened." "Not fast enough," Ilya replied. "We are burning time Seraphe does not have." Queen Mind Isidra sent a ripple of disapproval through the Vishari channels, but did not veto. The Lume approved. They distrusted drones on instinct. In the shuttle bay, Sergeant Kwesi Adu checked his team's gear. His armor was scarred from previous deployments, plates replaced and repainted. He moved with contained power, eyes sharp. War had taught him to respect both tools and uncertainty. "You look too eager," Lena Kavarik said, leaning against the bulkhead. The pilot's flight suit was half-zipped, helmet under one arm, dark hair pulled into a messy knot. Her grin was lopsided, deliberately careless, a way to bleed off tension. Kwesi gave her a flat look. "You get your thrills dodging plasma and vacuum. Let me have my haunted alien megastructure." "You think it's haunted?" Lena asked. "No," Kwesi replied. "I think it's full of unknown hazards I can't shoot, which is worse." Lena thought of the star outside, shackled by the spire's gravity net, and suppressed a shiver. "Try not to annoy the ancient super technology, then," he snorted. "I'll be polite." Minutes later, shuttles launched, carrying humans, Lume, Vishari, drones with organic controllers, and a handful of Thalkar observers. Ilya rode in the lead craft alongside Maera, Zara, and Lila. Hands-on leadership was his habit. Some called it reckless. He called it trust, put where it mattered. As they crossed the threshold that had scrambled unmanned probes, every instrument on the shuttle flickered. Lights dimmed. Control panels spat errors. For a moment, Ilya felt the weightlessness of systems failure. Then backup manual lines kicked in. Analog gauges, Insulated cables, human muscle. Still with me? Lena's voice came through, tight but steady, from her seat at the shuttle's controls. Still with you, Ilya confirmed. Everyone sound off. Voices responded, some shaky, some calm. As the shuttle's viewports cleared, the interior of the spire opened around them. They emerged into a cavernous space, a spherical chamber whose walls were studded with columns, each carved with patterns that seemed to shift if stared at too long. Threaded through the center of the sphere, suspended by fields that hummed at the edge of perception, floated a miniature star, not a copy, a captured fragment. Heat shimmered around it, tamed by layered fields into something survivable. What in all naming conventions? Samir whispered over the link. Somewhere in a trailing shuttle. Maera's scientist's soul sang. Here was a lab built to experiment with stellar plasma directly. The builders had not simulated stars. They had stolen pieces. Docking clamps extended from the spire's inner surface, guided by ancient protocols sensing mass and motion. They're inviting us in, Lena murmured. Or eating us, Quasi muttered. His instincts measured angles of fire and cover in this vastness and came up wanting. Ilya's mind ran parallel paths, one evaluating structural integrity and air composition, the other reviewing mission objectives. He imagined Seraphe's sky, unaware, and forced his attention back to the present. Doc, he said. Stay ready to pull out if anything tries to digest us. The shuttle mated with a waiting platform. Ramps extended. Atmosphere readings remained within tolerances, if slightly thin and laced with trace ions. Helmets stay on, Ilya ordered. Filters engaged. We treat every surface like it might rewrite us. They stepped into the Revanthi spire. Days blurred into one another as the boarding party mapped, tested, and translated. Archivist Layla Benabid discovered that certain patterns on the walls responded to touch, rearranging themselves into new forms that corresponded to different informational layers. They were not writing in the usual sense, but something more akin to living diagrams. With Zara's help, and fragments of Karun myths as a key, Lila learned to coax the patterns into sequences that told stories. She stood in what had once been a control theater and watched, projected around her, a reenactment of the builder's art. Stars gently nudged into new orbits, flares dampened before they could scorch newborn worlds, failing dwarfs coaxed into one last brightening. They weren't conquerors, Zara said, awe in her voice. They were gardeners. They tended the sky. Lila traced a final sequence with her palm. The projection shifted. The builders, vague and abstract in form, stood before the image of a rising power. Aggressive, consuming, spreading. A civilization whose diagrams came with sharp, angular motifs Zyra recognized far too well. Zyrath. Except the timelines didn't match. This was long before the modern Dominion. Perhaps a prior incarnation, or something like it. The Spire's builders had faced a choice: destroy the threat preemptively by tearing out its sons, or stand aside. They had argued, debated, records showed models of death curves, scenarios of suffering, all laid out in unbearable clarity. Then, at the last, they had turned away. They rewrote their system to refuse direct destructive commands. Then, they abandoned it. Layla's throat tightened. They were afraid of becoming what they fought, or of making war on a scale that could not be undone, Zara said. Elsewhere in the spire, Maera and a mixed team of human and Vishari technicians crawled through conduits, reverse engineering the field generators that held the microstar. Samir discovered that the spire's core controlled not just the local captive sun, but remnants of a network once spread across the galaxy. Most nodes were dark, but a few still pulsed like distant beacons. If we weren't in a crisis, we could spend a lifetime cataloging this, he said. We don't have a lifetime, Mara reminded him gently. We have a star with 5-ish years on the clock, minus whatever acceleration the Continuum Lance can apply. Her team learned enough to build an interface layer between human engineering and the Spire's primordial systems. They designed the gravitic shear lattice modules as modular descendants of the Spire's own manipulators, scaled down but configurable. At night cycle, when the station lights dimmed, Ilya walked alone through one of the observation corridors. Through the transparent wall, he could see the microstar pulsing within its cage. Even reduced, its presence pressed on his mind. He thought of his grandparents' stories of blackout nights during orbital riots, of city lights going dark, of the sudden awareness of stars overhead. He had always taken comfort in the idea that those pinpoints were fixed, patient. Now, in this place, he saw stars as things that could be gripped. He wondered whether that knowledge would leave any culture unaltered. While the Revanthi Spire gave humanity and its allies the tools they needed, the Xyrath closed their grip around SCI-FI. Strategos Varuk stood aboard a command ship in the SCI-FI system, watching the stars' readings scroll by. The continuum lance nodes in this region had been active for decades, slowly twisting the stars' internal balance. Now, with rumors of Allied interference growing, Varuk decided to hasten the process. He issued new commands to the network, tightening field geometries, increasing energy input. The star responded with subtle shifts, minute tremors in core pressure, rising neutrino flux. On SCI-FI's surface, Orosok scientists noticed anomalies in their solar observatories. They reported upticks in certain frequencies, irregularities in flare cycles. Their containment treaties gave them no right to question Xyrath activities in orbital space. They could only watch, unease gnawing at their bones. In a secure bunker, an Orosok analyst finally received a partial leak of the Oblivion calendar, courtesy of a sympathetic Thalkar intermediary. He saw the line with SCI-FI's coordinates and date. His crystalline fingers trembled as he realized someone, somewhere, had already decided the day his world would burn. He brought the file to Halrun and the Orosok Council. The elder's luminous eyes hardened. The Orosok had once sworn never again to bow unquestioningly. They had agreed to containment to avoid extinction, not to invite it. Now they faced the prospect that their would-be jailers had all along been preparing a silent execution. When Allied envoys arrived in SCI-FI orbit 2 days later, carrying word of Project Helioshift, the Orosok did not hesitate. "Do whatever you must," Halrun said to the human representative on his view screen. "If this attempt fails, we were already dead. At least this way we face our end with defiance instead of quiet terror." The assault on a continuum lance relay near SCI-FI began in cold silence. Sergeant Kwesi Adu strapped into a drop pod, armor sealed, weapon systems checked. Around him, human marines and a small contingent of Vishari assault organisms waited for the signal. Above, orbiting at the edge of the relay's sensor reach, a stealth corvette held position. The relay itself was a spindly lattice of exotic matter and hard light frames, built into the shadow of a small moonlet, its main projector aimed at SCI-FI's star. It hummed with invisible violence. Kwesi's mission was simple in description, complex in execution. Infiltrate, plant disruptors that would misalign the relay's contribution to the Lance's convergence, and extract with as much data as possible. Lena Kavarik piloted the insertion craft. Her hands danced over the controls, slipping the pod cluster through gaps in the Xyrath sensor web. "They're proud of this thing," she said over the link, voice dry. "So proud, they forgot to look under their own feet." Kwesi smiled faintly. Her flippancy masked fear. He recognized it because he felt it too. "Maybe don't say that until after we're out," he replied. The pods detached, silent, and fell. They struck the relay's underbelly with mag-emitter pulses, clamped on, and cut their way inside. Gunfire, in the narrow sense, barely featured. The Xyrath favored plasma projectors and hard light barriers, automated fields that burned or sliced. The boarding team's armor adapted, reconfiguring plates under Kwesi's subtle commands. They pushed forward, leaving scorch marks on alien walls. What shocked the relay's defenders was not that they were attacked. They had drills for that. It was how close the humans were willing to go. Kwesi dove through a half-formed barrier, his armor screaming warnings as hardlight bit at his back. He rolled, came up under a Xyrath officer, and drove a blunt force emitter into the alien's chest. The Xyrath's scream cut short. The Vishari assault creatures scuttled along ceilings and walls, adhering to surfaces with organic pads, their controllers riding in armored cradles, feeding them commands. Combined, they moved like a single entity, flowing around fire. Lena's smaller team reached the relay's core, where the Lance harmonics were calibrated. They fought their way to a control nexus and began planting disruptors. Samir's toys better work, Lena muttered, sliding a device into a maintenance slot. Or this was a short dumb trip. They'll work, Kwesi said over the team channel. He cares too much about living. The disruptors sank into the relay's systems, seeding subtle misphasing that would ripple through the Lance network, buying helioshift precious seconds or even minutes at the critical moment. As they withdrew, alarms blared, and Xyrath reinforcements flooded corridors. Kwesi took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, armor plating vaporizing, flesh charring. He grunted, teeth clenched, but kept moving, hauling a wounded comrade one-armed. Pain flared, then narrowed to a cold thread. He pushed it aside. His mind focused on one thought. Seraphi's sky did not deserve to be chosen as a target by anyone but its own people. Lena stayed at the rear guard, piloting a combat drone manually, swinging it into positions that blocked lines of fire. A plasma lance pierced the drone, turning it into slag. She abandoned its controls without a word and switched to a backup. They made it out with fewer than they came in. On the exfiltration craft, Kwesi sat hunched, pressure dressings hissing as the medic worked. He felt no triumph, only a tight, angry satisfaction. The data they had ripped from the relay's harmonics banks was worth the price. It would let Maera's team refine their models. It would also enrage Strategos Varuk. That, in Kwesi's private estimation, was a bonus. On the Ravanthi Spire, Maera spread the freshly decrypted Lance harmonics out across a virtual star, overlaying them with the Spire's own control fields. Now we know exactly how they're twisting Seraphi, she said to her team. We can stop the twist, but we can twist differently. Amita, face pale from studying too many explosion models, pointed at a region of the holographic star. If we apply shear here and here, over months, we can shift the star's moment of inertia. That changes how the collapse propagates. Samir nodded, eyes wide. Our gravitic shear lattice modules become temporary handles on the star. We're not pulling the whole thing like a ball. We're kneading it. Zara, standing nearby, considered the diagrams with a historian's instinct for analogies. We're taking a spear someone threw and nudging it so it misses the heart, she said. The Lume Seer Eluni raised her hands, feeling the simulated flows. It will scream, she said softly, but it may yet scream past the children and into the dark. They built the plan, layers of contingencies and fail-safes, aware that some of those would fail. They named their assembled infrastructure the Stellar Forge Array, anchored largely in the Corralis system with a forest of gravitic shear lattice segments, ready to be deployed into near-stellar space around Seraphi's sun. To power it, they repurposed the Solaris Crown, a vast ring of collectors around Corralis's star. Originally intended to provide clean energy to a handful of habitats and research stations, it would now beam nearly all its capacity across interstellar distances along a tuned conduit. The Vishari swarm bent entire industrial swathes to manufacture lattice modules and structural supports, grumbling about diverted resources but fascinated despite themselves. On Solace Prime, Soraya Ruiz watched progress reports flow in and fended off a storm of diplomatic messages. The Thalkar Concord drafted a formal protest, warning that any future use of such technology would require oversight. The Korathi hegemony offered to send peacekeepers to help supervise the project, thinly veiling a bid for influence. Soraya listened, argued, conceded small points, held firm on the core. She knew history would judge her either as the leader who sanctioned cosmic recklessness or the one who refused to act against a scheduled genocide. She found, unexpectedly, that the choice between those legacies was not difficult. We will share most of what we learn, she told the Galactic Council in a curtained session. But the immediate priority is to prevent an extinction. The Xyrath have already crossed every line we might fear. Cetan, hearing that, felt a familiar Thalkar anxiety, laws fraying under the strain of reality. But deep beneath the worry, he respected the human stubbornness. It was easier to make rules in a quiet sky, harder when someone had turned that sky into ammunition. The day the Stellar Forge Array came online, the Seraphi system looked both ordinary and thick with hidden tension. To the naked eye, Seraphi's sun shone with the same pale gold. To a sensitive instrument, it hummed with wrongness, its core like a clenched fist. The array modules drifted into position, motes of engineered matter threading themselves into an invisible shell around the star. Each gravitic shear lattice segment locked into its planned orbit and powered up, giving off nothing visible but warping space in controlled patterns. In the Corellis system, the Solaris crown flared bright. Its collectors reconfigured, focusing their harvested energy into coherent beams that lanced through the void toward the Forge Array's receptive nodes. On the ESS Far Horizon, orbiting a safe but relative distance from SCI-FI's star, control centers thrummed with activity. Myera stood at the heart of one, surrounded by consoles and holo overlays. Sweat prickled at her neck, though the air was cool. Lattice segments report nominal, Amita said, voice steady only through effort. Power influx at 96% of models, rising. Samir glanced between a dozen readouts at once. Core oscillations matching predictions so far, he said. SCI-FI's star is listening. On another deck, Ilya walked through the ship, checking in on crews. He paused at a viewport where a junior technician stared out, eyes wide. It doesn't look any different, the tech said. That's what scares me. All this, and the star just sits there. It's moving, Ilya said softly. We're just too small to see it with our eyes, his comm pinged. Admiral Rohit Bandari's voice came through. Strategos Varuk's fleet has entered system perimeter. Bandari reported from the flagship of the defensive picket line. Zyrath warships, 3 capital, 9 heavy escorts, 18 smaller. They're not hiding. Ilya's jaw set. Course? Direct toward the Forge Array. They know what we're doing. Of course they do, Ilya said. They built the schedule. Strategos Varuk watched the incoming data with mounting irritation. The Allies' hubris astonished him. To meddle with the death of a star was audacious enough. To do so in open sight, deploying clumsy field structures around SCI-FI's sun, daring him to respond, that bordered on insult. He opened a channel, his visage projected into the command centers of the Solace fleet and key Allied ships. This is Strategos Varuk of the Zyrath Dominion, he said, voice rich with the cold satisfaction of someone holding a secret detonator. You toy at the edges of forces beyond your control. Withdraw now, and we will consider limiting our retribution to those directly involved. Continue, and you provoke consequences on a scale you cannot imagine. On the human flagship's bridge, Admiral Bandari listened, then cut the volume and considered. He was a practical man with little patience for grandstanding. It was absurd, he thought. The Zyrath spoke of consequences, as if they had not already set in motion the erasure of an entire species. He reopened the channel on a wider distribution. This is Admiral Rohit Bandari of the Soul Science Fleet, he replied. We are already living through the consequences of your actions. We will not withdraw. Varuk's eyes narrowed. He had anticipated resistance. He had not fully appreciated that humans would refuse even the possibility of negotiation if it meant abandoning a single marked world. You are outnumbered, Varuk said. Outgunned. You cannot protect that fragile ring of toys around their star and your own ships at the same time. You may be right, Bandari said, but you will have to prove it the hard way. He cut the channel. Varuk hissed. His claws tapped the armrest. He signaled his fleet. Advance, he ordered. Crush their defenses. When their array lies in ruins, we will decide whether to trigger the star ahead of schedule, as an object lesson. The Zyrath ships surged forward. The battle that followed was not balanced. The Soul Science fleet and Allied vessels fielded fewer capital ships, fewer weapons platforms, but they had numbers in smaller craft, in improvisation, and in humans willing to attempt maneuvers that made Allied tacticians wince. Admiral Bandari's plan was brutal in its simplicity. Form a living wall between the Zyrath and the Forge Array, and hold until helioshift reached the critical phase. S. Calderon, flank high, he ordered. Draw their forward destroyers off course. Smaller craft, swarm tactics. Use their own fire arcs against them. The Calderon, a heavy cruiser commanded by a captain who had volunteered very quickly when the mission call went out, moved into the path of 2 Zyrath warships and opened fire with every weapon it had. The Xyrath replied in kind. Plasma streams cut into the Calderon's shields, which flared, then dimmed. Hull plating buckled. Warning alarms cascaded. The human crew gritted their teeth and kept shooting. On the far horizon's hangar deck, Lena Kovarik sealed her helmet and ran up the ramp of a small, fast shuttle repurposed as a decoy and countermeasure platform. Behind her, a line of similar craft powered up. Human pilots strapped in, faces set. Your job is to make them angry. Ilya's last briefing had concluded. Make them waste shots. Make them doubt their targeting data. Every second they look at you is a second they're not hitting the array. Lena felt a laugh catch in her throat. Being annoying? I was born for this. Now, as she weaved her shuttle through converging fire, she found that bravado had its limits. Hardlight lances stabbed past, close enough to overload her sensors. She flipped and rolled, engines screaming, flares and ECM bursts blossoming behind her. This is not flying, she muttered through clenched teeth. This is juggling knives with my ship. A bolt clipped her port stabilizer. The shuttle bucked, alarms howling. Panels sparked. She slammed manual override, fingers white on the controls, and wrestled the craft back into a survivable trajectory. On another vector, Xyrath strike craft dove toward a cluster of gravitic shear lattice modules, their intent clear. Disrupt the array's precise geometry. A trio of Lumai corvettes intercepted, weaving trails of energy that sang a harmonic counterpoint to the Xyrath fire. Ilunai's kin had brought weapons that bent plasma, not simply blocked it. They twisted incoming beams aside, sacrificing their own hull integrity to keep the nodes intact. Vishari barges, enormous and ungainly, hung back, using their bulk to shield critical power conduits. Their queen mind hissed at the risk to her precious fabrication hubs, but she held them in place. Vishari did not typically like direct confrontation. Today, they were learning that some calculations favored courage. On the far horizon's command center, Ilya watched icons wink out, friendly ships gone, enemy ships crippled. Each loss hit like a physical blow. He compartmentalized the grief, knowing he would have to face it later. Status on Helio shift, he called. Outer shear lattice at 90% deployment, Amita replied. Inner ring at 85. Some modules failing under stress, but the grid is holding. Mayera's hands moved over a control table, fingers delicately adjusting field configurations. On the holo, Seraphe's star looked unchanged, but the data told a different story. We're adding tiny rotational perturbations, she explained, more for herself than others. Over the next hours, they'll compound. Hours, Ilya said. We might not have hours. The star doesn't care about our battle schedule, Mayera said. It cares about torque and gradients. June watched the controlled chaos around him, feeling out of place and utterly necessary at once. His domain was words, not weapons, but the decisions made here would echo through treaties for generations. What would he tell future Thalkar tribunals, Vishari cost councils, Lume seers, that humanity had gambled with a star and won, or lost? That they had violated an unspoken taboo or shattered a monstrous precedent? He decided in that moment that he did not care which court would judge him. The only verdict that mattered now was whether Seraphe would see another sunrise. Strategos Varuuk saw his ships slow, trapped in a swirling melee instead of slicing cleanly toward the array. His disdain twitched into anger. These tactics are wasteful, his aide hissed. They throw lives away in amateur maneuvers. They are effective, Varuuk said. We expected them to preserve their resources. Instead, they spend them recklessly. It is inconvenient. He watched a human frigate deliberately ram a smaller Xyrath gunship, both tearing open, debris spinning away. He watched a cluster of shuttles dart into the path of a heavy beam meant for a lattice hub, drawing it aside and disintegrating. They would die just to shave a sliver off his timing. Fine, he would adjust. Divert more power to the continuum lance, he ordered. We will no longer wait for the optimal collapse moment. We will force it now. His technicians hesitated. Strategos, premature initiation will reduce overall alignment efficiency. The resulting event will still kill the Orosok, Varuk snapped. And destroy the insolent array they have wrapped around our prize. Execute. Reluctant claws danced on controls. Deep in space, continuum lance nodes pulsed, throwing the star's core into sharper imbalance. On the forge array's holo, new patterns bloomed. Myera inhaled sharply. They're forcing the timeline, she said. The collapse could begin any time now. Our slow adjustments might not be enough. Amita's heart dropped. If it collapses before we've fully shifted the angular momentum, the blast cone still hits SCI-FI. Options raced through Mayera's mind. None fit the parameters neatly. All had trade-offs. One, however, pushed itself forward, wild and ugly, and possible. We overcharge select lattice nodes, she said. Push them beyond their safe load, to the point of structural failure. Samir stared. That will tear them apart. Yes, Myera said. But the last thing they do before they die will be to exert an enormous localized shear on the star's outer layers, enough to yank the forming shockwave into a new configuration. Amita's stomach twisted. We design those nodes for sustained gentle pressure. This is a hammer blow, and we only need one hammer, Mayera replied, one that lands at the exact right time. If we don't, the supernova hits SCI-FI full on. Everyone dies. If we do, we might save them, or we might destabilize the star further and take out half the system. Silence fell over the control center, broken only by the hum of machinery and distant rumbles from ship impacts. Ilya joined them, having just signed orders, sending yet another squadron into the teeth of Zyrath fire. You have something? He asked Myera. She explained quickly. He listened, jaw clenched. How many lattice nodes would we lose? He asked. Probably the overcharged ones and any directly linked, Mayera said. A few dozen, maybe more if cascade failure starts. And the crews in those nodes? Ilya asked, though he already knew the answer. They'd be martyrs, Samir said bluntly, throat tight. There's no way to get them out in time. Myera felt bile rise. She had built these systems. The thought of sending people out onto them, then deliberately overloading them, felt like signing their death warrants. Yet she saw no path that avoided death, only choices about who and for what. Ilya looked around the room. Faces met his. Human, Lume, Vishari, Thalkar. All knew what he was about to ask. Can it work? He said quietly. Myera met his gaze. It can. No promises. But physics doesn't forbid it. He nodded once. Decision settled in his bones. Then we ask for volunteers, he said. We don't assign this. June opened his mouth to reference regulations about command responsibilities, then closed it. This was not a tribunal. This was 5 seconds between life and death for a world. The call went out. Across the array, in dozens of small control pods anchored to lattice segments near SCI-FI's burning surface, crews listened. Some cursed, some prayed, some laughed. The brittle edge of fear sharpened into defiance. Quasi, having refused to stand down despite his healing shoulder, occupied one of the inner node support craft. He heard the call for volunteers and did not hesitate. Node C-19, Sergeant Adu, he said over the channel. Put my segment on the overcharge list. The coordinating officer on the array hesitated. Sergeant, your file. Shows I've survived 3 drops I shouldn't have, Quasi said. I'm ahead on luck. I'll pay some back. Lena, still flying decoy runs, heard the message ping in her cockpit. Between maneuvers, she hit transmit. C-22, she said. Kovarik, my node's a good candidate too. It's in the band Myera flagged. You're flying air support, the coordinator protested. We need you up there. You'll get someone else, Lena said. You ask for people to stand on top of a detonating gravity lens. You don't get to be picky when someone volunteers. On a nearby Lumai vessel, a young seer warrior named Tirai insisted on joining an overcharged node as well, feeling a deep obligation to help steer the star's scream. Even a Vishari organic controller demanded a place, surprising Ishidra with a surge of individual will. The queen mind quivered, then relented, recognizing that some impulses could not be optimized away. In the Forge Array Control Center, Amita watched the volunteer list populate. They're lining up. she whispered. We don't have enough nodes to give each of them one. Samir swallowed hard. People go to die for a world they've never seen. Ilya listened. Pride and terror warred in him. This was what humanity was. Reckless compassion. It had saved them before. It might kill them this time. He accepted that. My era, he said. Choose the nodes. Match them to the physics, not to our hearts. She did. Her hands did not tremble, though inside, something tore. Final preparations clicked into place. The selected lattice nodes lit up on the holo as red points. Overcharge sequences armed. Safe shutdowns disabled. Each node reported its crew ready. On SCI-FI itself, warning messages spread through Orosok networks. Halrun gathered his council, his family, his people, and told them the truth, that their star was about to die in a way it never should have, and that strangers in the sky were trying something no one had ever attempted to let them live through it. Some Orosok panicked. Some retreated into old caverns, as if stone could shield them from a star's wrath. Others climbed to high places, or crowded around aging observatories, wanting to see. They will either save us, or they will not, Halrun said. We will not face this hiding in fear. He stepped back onto his balcony. The sky looked deceptively calm. In space, SCI-FI's sun shuddered. Deep within, under the nudging of the continuum lance and the long-term manipulations, its core had reached a threshold beyond which no equilibrium could hold. Fusion faltered. Gravity surged inward. Neutrino flux spiked. The clock hit zero, in a sense that mattered to physics, not minds. On the Forge Array's holo, the simulation shifted from steady state into a wild cascade of probabilities. It's starting, Amita said, voice thin. Overcharge sequence, Myra ordered. On my mark. Node controllers acknowledged. Quasi felt his cockpit vibrate as capacitors surged far beyond rated values. Fields around his segment bloomed, tugging at his bones. Lena strapped herself in, hands hovering over manual trim controls that would be meaningless in another minute. She thought briefly of her younger brother back home, of his bad jokes, of the promise she had made to show him the engine cores of a starship. She sent him a last unsent message in her mind and smiled fiercely. Node C, 19 at 150%, Quasi reported. C-22, 180. Tirai, on another node, chanted an old Lumai verse under her breath, filaments bright as the fields ramped. Now, Myra said, the overcharged nodes dumped their amplified fields into the star's outer layers. SCI-FI's sun convulsed. From one angle, it looked unchanged. From another, in the flow of data, it twisted like a vast, burning ocean caught by an unseen tidal wave. Lattice segments tore. Metals screamed, then atomized. Control pods shook like toys in the grip of forces meant only for celestial bodies. Quasi's last coherent sensation was of his body being pulled in two directions at once, his armor warping around him. Then, a strange calm, as if he were suspended for a heartbeat in the center of everything. Lena's shuttle, bolted to her node, came apart in a blinding flare. She saw the star's light through shattered panels, white gold and impossibly bright. It filled her vision, her world, then nothing. On the holo, the star's surface bulged along new axes. The imploding core rebounded, shockwave racing outward. But where it would have expanded symmetrically, now it met regions of altered density and momentum. The shockwave lopsided. It roared outward in a geyser, a colossal plume of plasma and radiation, whipping away from SCI-FI's orbital path. The burgeoning supernova brightened the system, turning night side into day on every planet and moon. An expanding shell of matter screamed into the dark, its densest fury angled into an emptier region of space. SCI-FI still caught a glancing blow. Its atmosphere boiled, upper layers stripped, ground-level radiation levels spiked, seas churned, forests burned at their edges. But it did not evaporate. Its crust did not melt. Its core did not turn to slag. On the planet's plateau city, Halrun clung to his balcony railing as the sky became an ocean of white fire. His stone skin cracked, then resealed, his body absorbing as much as it could. He expected, in that instant, to feel everything end. Instead, the blast shadow of a high ridge and the planet's own magnetic field reduced the fury that reached him. He fell, unconscious, but breathing. Hours later, he would awaken to a changed sky and a living world. On the far horizon, the entire ship groaned as residual gravitational waves shook it. Systems flickered, fire suppressants deployed in empty corridors, but the hull held. Amita stared at the external feed, tears streaking down her face, unnoticed. The star that had been Seraphi's sun now shone far brighter, swelling as its outer layers flew away, then beginning to dim, transitioning toward the compact remnant it would become. Hollow's updated blast cone models. Seraphi's icon remained solid, battered, but in the survivable band. "We did it," Samir whispered, disbelief warring with relief. "We actually did it." Mayera's shoulders sagged. For a moment, she wanted nothing more than to lie down and sleep for a year, but she forced herself to stay upright. "It's not over," she said hoarsely. "We need to assess collateral effects, stabilize what we can, count who we lost." Her eyes drifted to the red markers on the lattice network, the nodes that had disappeared at the moment of overcharge. Beside each, a list of names. She pressed her lips together. No tears yet. There would be time later. In the picket line, Xyrath ships reeled. The unexpected gravitational shock and electromagnetic flux scrambled their formations. Two of their vessels, too close to an unlucky wave, fractured and spun apart, hulls torn. Strategos Verawook leaned forward, teeth bared. He had forced the star to die on his schedule, but in the wrong configuration. The Orosok world still orbited, scorched but intact. The calendar, for the first time, had failed him. "Regroup," he snapped. "Crush their fleet. Then we will finish Seraphi by conventional means." But his bridge crew hesitated. Sensor readings were a mess. Communications lagged. Their carefully prepared fear campaign had been punctured. On the Solace side, Admiral Bandari sensed the moment. The Xyrath had lost the psychological upper hand. "Press the advantage," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on their damaged capital." Vishari barges unleashed volleys of kinetic slugs accelerated by repurposed industrial launchers. Lume corvettes sang lances of twisted plasma that burrowed through shields. Human cruisers spat railgun rounds and guided missiles. The battle would not end in a decisive rout. Both sides were too depleted. But Varauk saw the calculus. To stay risked losing not just ships, but his own command, perhaps his life. A Strategos taken captive? After failing the calendar? Unthinkable. "Withdraw," he ordered, voice like acid. "Signal the Lance network to stand down from further local operations." His flagship pivoted, engines flaring, and retreated into the dark, smaller ships falling in behind. On the Allied channels, a cheer rose. Some wept. Some simply slumped in their harnesses, too drained to feel anything yet. Ilya, in the far horizon's battered bridge, exhaled slowly. His hands had started to shake, unnoticed, sometime in the last minutes. Now he forced them still. "Damage reports," he said, "and someone get me a live feed from Seraphi as soon as they can send." In the days that followed, the full scope of what they had done settled like dust after a storm. Seraphi's atmosphere had thinned. Radiation levels spiked in some regions, fell back in others. Vast auroras swept the poles. Some regions would be uninhabitable for years. Others, with shielding and support from orbit, could sustain life. The Orosok counted their dead and living. Many had perished in infrastructure failures, in fires, in building collapses, when tremors shook their crust. Yet the core of their civilization endured. Their archives, their children, their bonds. Halrun stood again on his balcony, looking up at a sky now dominated by the newborn remnant of their star. A bright, compact object, its light strange and hard. He knew in his bones that his people had not been saved by mercy from their enemies, but by the stubborn defiance of strangers who had refused to accept that someone else's timetable ruled over them. On Solace Prime, grief and celebration mixed uneasily. Memorials went up for the crews lost in the Forge Array's overcharged nodes, for the pilots who had not returned, for ships that now orbited as burned-out hulks or debris clouds. Lena Kovarich's younger brother watched a recorded message she had sent before the final run, her face bright and teasing as she told him not to try to steal her shuttle until she got home. He watched it in a quiet room, tears running freely, proud and broken. Sergeant Kwesi Adu's old squadmates gathered in a dim bar, their laughter too loud, their stories of his exaggerated strengths, both tribute and shield, against the weight in their chests. Somewhere, a holo displayed his name among many, under the simple heading, "Those Who Stood on the Star." The phrase would enter human language as shorthand for courage that bordered on madness. Queen Mind Ishidra compiled reports of Vishari losses. Her internal calculus shifted. The cost in resources, the cost in lives, weighed against the survival of an entire foreign species, and the dismantling of a weapon that could one day have been turned on the swarm. The numbers made a compelling argument. Thalkar Envoy Seaton filed a preliminary draft of what would become the Stellar Commons Accord, laying out basic principles. That forced stellar manipulation, especially for destructive purposes, would be treated as a collective concern. He insisted on oversight councils, notification protocols, shared monitoring stations. Jun So-ryun reviewed the draft and added one clause, simple but profound, that any use of such power to prevent an already initiated genocide would be considered a duty, not a crime, if conducted under transparent coalition supervision. Seer Elunai returned to the Lume, her people's perception of stars forever altered. She taught that the sky was not merely to be listened to, but, in extremis, answered. Strategos Varuuk, back in Dominion space, faced internal review. He argued correctly that the Orisak star had collapsed on schedule, that the Allied tampering had merely shifted the details. But his superiors saw the larger failure. The Dominion's monopoly on terror had been broken. Whispers spread among Zyrath military and political circles of human audacity, of species willing to burn their own flesh to rearrange the heavens. Some dismissed it as unsustainable madness. Others, quietly, feared it. On the Revanthe Spire, the dust of activation and battle began to settle. Layla Benabid walked again into the Spire's control theater, fingers tracing patterns on the walls. The previous sequences still lingered there, the builders' histories, their dilemmas. Behind one panel, she sensed something new. "Zara," she called softly. "I think there's another layer." Together, they coaxed a fresh pattern into being. Lines shifted, circles unfolded. New symbols emerged, faint, ancient. They described not only the builders' past choices, but their expectations of the future, hints that they had always known their network could be rediscovered, that someone else might someday stand where Mayera and Ilya had stood and face a similar choice. One fragment caught Layla's eye, an abstract star marked by multiple glyphs, surrounded by smaller symbols representing civilizations. Arrows indicated intervention, prevention, restraint. Beneath it, a final mark, one the translators struggled with, then tentatively rendered as, "not the last." Zyra felt a chill. "So the Zyrath are not the first to pervert stellar mastery," she murmured. "And we are not the last to resist it." Layla looked through a viewport at the captured microstar, still humming in its cage. Beyond it, far away, the light of Seraphi's altered sun reached them, softened by distance. Humanity had taken one stand in one system. The galaxy was vast. Other calendars might exist, other weapons, other spires. But for now, in that moment, one scheduled extinction had failed to occur. One world, meant to be a line on a ledger, still turned. Somewhere above Seraphi, in an orbital habitat hastily repurposed as a temporary refuge, an Orisak child looked up through a viewport at the strange, bright object that was now their star and asked what had happened. An elder knelt beside them and answered. Someone far away refused to let our day of ending be written in stone. That answer would not undo the scars. It would not bring back the dead. But it would become the seed of a new kind of story, told across languages and species, the story of the day humans decided the timetable of the sky was not beyond their reach, and then proved it by pushing a star.